Today we're meeting with Jeff Carr, a licensed clinical social worker. And before we go any further, I'll just ask you to identify your practice and give us your contact information, please.
Okay. So I have a private practice. It's out in Bluffdale, Utah. And the best way to find me there is to go to wisepathcounseling.com. And I also work part-time here in Salt Lake for comprehensive psychological services. The way to contact me there is wecanhelpout.com. That's the best way to find me through the part-time job. So that's how to get a hold of me if you want to see me.
All right. Today, correct me if I'm wrong, but we're going to be talking about children and how much they actually do know about, how much they can perceive when their parents are in a divorce, and specifically, let's try to focus on parents who think that they can pull one over on the kids, who they want to disparage the other party, the other parent. They want to try to get the kids to take sides. Tell us a little bit about how that happens, what that does to kids, and why that would be something that I would assume you're going to say ought to be avoided.
Right. Often parents, especially with younger kids, will kind of assume that the children may not have awareness of what's going on between the mom and dad. Usually the instinct or the feeling is, well, my kids can't comprehend it because they don't know the language that we're using around the house, those sort of things. What parents sometimes don't realize is that it's more of the energy of the emotion that the kids are picking up on. That's what they're going to be reading in the home. And so that's the thing that sometimes, often in a divorce gets overlooked because the focus is so much on, to use a cliche, the he said, she said stuff, and that's so verbal based. It's sometimes hard to be aware of the actual energy that the kids are picking up day to day. Kind of the anger, the frustration, the whole range of emotion that goes on with divorce. The kids are in a sense, are like sponges emotionally. They don't have the defense mechanisms that an adult would have to kind of filter that stuff out.
In fact, I was going to say, I remember one time my wife and I were having a heated discussion where we both agreed with each other. We both had the object of our anger was somebody else, but we were both being very animated, and we had the door closed and everything. But our kids came by, a couple of our kids, and just like, hey, is everything okay? And then you could see they were very distressed, and we just kind of looked at them like, at first, like, what? No, everything's fine. So I can only imagine how when it truly is two parents pitted against each other.
Right.
It's pretty hard for them to miss.
That's a perfect example. They're not gonna get the content of the conversation, which is if they were older, they'd be able to say, this isn't about mom and dad, this is about someone else. They can't comprehend that because it's verbal, but they can get the energy, the frustration or the anger that's going on. They pick that up a lot easier and sooner than they would the other. So that's the thing to remember with what's going on there.
Let me ask you this. There's a lot of times when, and for reasons I can guess but don't really fully understand, and I don't know what you've encountered, when a couple, somebody in the couple says, well, I want the kids to side with me. It may be because that person wants friends, or it may be that person says, well, if the kids side with me, they'll say they want to live with me, and then I'll get the money in child support, or I'll be able to claim victory or something like that.
Right.
What does that do to kids? Are there some, and this is candid stuff. If kids are more resilient than people will say in the kind of the Hallmark card mentality, let me know what you really think, even if you think it might be somewhat unpopular or somewhat different. Now, if you happen to believe exactly what I was talking about, I want to know that too. But do you get where I'm coming from there?
Yeah, there's a lot of reasons why a parent is going to put the children in the middle, so to speak. In some ways, use them as a pawn for financial or other reasons. The divorce is difficult enough with the separation of the parents, but the biggest emotional struggle there for the child is feeling like they have to choose a parent or choose a side, which is very difficult for a child to say, it feels like I have to have a choice here. Do I choose mom or dad? especially if one of the parents is saying, you need to support me or you need to back me up on this or whatever the situation is, that is just emotionally tearing them apart inside, saying, I don't want to have to pick mom or dad. I want both parents. Kids can understand a little bit more if the parents decide, look, this isn't going to work out, we can't be together. They can deal with that to some degree if the parents are saying, mom and dad are still friends, we're going to still see each other, you don't have to choose mom or dad. If the parents are saying that, the child can be pretty resilient and deal with it. It's when you have divorce on top of you have to pick a side, that's when the kids really struggle. That's when they have the hardest time.
Let me ask you this then, because I could be misunderstanding or misperceiving things, but it seems that it's fairly easy to get children of certain ages to side with a parent if that's what the parent's goal is. And let's just start with a couple of parameters so you know what I'm talking about. Let's assume that the parents are both decent people, but that in going into the divorce, one or both of them decides to say, I'm going to pit child against parent. It seems that I've seen it, I have to be honest, I see the mothers being more effective at it than the fathers, but I've seen mothers and fathers who are able to get kids to choose sides. Now, is what I'm seeing different than what they're feeling, or you see where I'm going with that?
Right. I think it is pretty easy for the parents to do that, at least on the surface of the emotions that the children will show. It's going to be harder for the parent to see the struggle that's going on underneath of, having to pick which parent they want to be with or spend time with or whatever the situation is. The child, in most cases, is just going to comply with the parent, especially if they're younger. That's what's going to seem to them to be best. If mom says, hey, just say that you want to spend time with me and everything will work out, the child's probably going to trust that because they're going to want to keep that trust with the parent that is saying that. They want to keep that trust established.
What would you say, what would a parent or an attorney for that parent say if they were how could they get a court or even a custody evaluator or a therapist or psychologist or whoever it might be saying, look, I am not getting down in the mud with my spouse, and I know what the kids are telling you, but I know I've done nothing to alienate them. I know I've done nothing to give them reason to dislike me, but what they're saying is because mom is working them over or dad is working them over. I'm not doing that. It seems like you almost expect me, Your Honor, to do the same thing so that I can create at least a question in your mind. Me falling on my sword is actually doing both me and the kids no good.
Right.
You ever see that? I assume you do, but I know I do in my line of work.
Yeah, there's often a parent that in one of the sides, one of the parents is going to see more clearly what's best for the children. Not completely, but in certain areas. And they're going to say, I'm not going to put my children in the middle. I'm not going to use them as a pawn. Mm-hmm. In some ways, it's going to look like that parent's losing out. If the other parent is saying, I'm going to draw my kids into my side.
Yeah, and not only that, but like losing out, but also it can give the impression that that parent doesn't care. You know what I mean? Or that, well, it's like, in other words, if one parent says, the kids side with me, and the other one's saying, no, they don't really side with either one of us, let's have them have a good relationship with both, it almost makes that other guy, the more rational and fair-minded person, look weak or defensive.
Right. Right. They may come across that way to the outside people looking in, or even the people that are fairly involved. What you have to remember is that parent is making probably what they believe is the best choice for their children, not for the judge, not for the attorney or the therapist who's involved, but what they think is best for the kids. And not necessarily in the short term. They may be looking in the big picture of saying, right now mom's going to win the battle or dad's going to win the battle, but in the long run, my kids are going to respect that I didn't use them as a pawn, and that's what's going to make the difference in the long term. And sometimes parents will take that approach of letting the spouse win the short-term battle, and in the long run, they've established trust with the children. So
let's talk about a 10-year, 12-year marriage. and we'll often see that happen around that time. It can be a little sooner, it could be a little later, but I'm saying, 7, 8, and I mean the 7-year itch actually does have some merit. There's a lot of marriages that they can hang in there for a little bit.
Right.
So then let's assume you've got 6-year-old, 5-year-old kids, or 6, 5, 4, or something like that. How does a parent who's got the other parent playing dirty, what can you tell those parents, saying, just love your kids, be consistent, be good-willed, and in 1 year, 10 years, how long does this parent have to suffer being looked at as the bad guy? And I realize each case is unique, but what are some general principles you can draw?
Well, generally, that's kind of a hard one to say in terms of time frame.
That's okay. Go ahead and tell us why, if that's the situation.
It's a big part of it is the age of the children, and also their situation, because it's not just the parent that's influencing, spending time with the mom or whatever. It's their friends, and if they like their school and maybe they don't like the neighborhood where dad lives, or vice versa. So that's a really big factor. A good general rule, if you wanted to have something a little more concrete, is that child, once they become 18, adult age, or around that time, that's when they're going to really have the recognition of, dad really was fair to us. He handled a bad situation, or mom was fair to us. She handled it the best she could. Maybe they have hard feelings that mom or dad didn't fight hard enough for us. But around that time, they're 18 to 20 years old is when they finally kind of recognize that maybe mom or dad did the best they could and they handled it the right way in the long run. So that's hard for parents to have to wait that long.
That's kind of a bitter pill for a lot of people to swallow.
Yeah.
If that's the only solution, then that's the only solution. Is there anything, however, that a parent could do not to lose touch with that child? And I'll give you a couple of extreme examples or some general examples. We all have met, especially in your line of work and mine, we've met some parents who have been wildly successful in demonizing a perfectly good parent, and those kids have fallen for it hook, line, and sinker.
Right.
It doesn't always have to include charges of child abuse, molestation, or things about mom or dad is a drunk or a drug addict or a Satan worshiper or a porn addict. But these are things that I've seen that can plant seeds of doubt in kids' minds very easily. And I am amazed. It doesn't happen all the time, but I'm amazed at the number of kids who, having known this parent for years, as soon as something disparaging is said, how easily they can accept it. So what do you do in a situation like that?
Well, it's hard, especially if the parent that's being disparaged doesn't have access to the children, if it's very limited or not at all for whatever the circumstances are. One thing to keep in mind, though, is as the kids get into junior high and high school, that parent's opinion is going to have less and less weight, because they're going to start mixing with a group of peers who are going to start to really question the parent. And that child's going to say, wait a second, and their mind's going to start working on that and say, maybe all that stuff mom was saying about dad over the years really wasn't true, because a lot of the peers are going to be in that same process of going to adolescence. A big feature of that being, parents are full of it, to put it bluntly. So
how about a situation where you've got one of the parents who pulls this kind of stunt? Well, go ahead and go with the other parent for the weekend or for the summer or for this holiday. I'll just suffer in silence on my own. If you'd rather spend time with that other person than me, if you want to oftentimes you can make children, loyal to you through guilt. Not necessarily, there's love for that parent, but it's not love that's motivating the child. And then again, let's say you're the parent seeing this. The kids show up. Yeah, here we are. It's like, and I'm channeling their thoughts. They may not act this way, but you can tell it's like, look, we're glad to be with you, other parent. It's nice to see you again. However, we're kind of feeling down in the dumps. because mom or dad back there really laid a guilt trip on us. We know that mom or dad is going to text us every 5 minutes and call us every hour. We're going to hate this, and even though we love you, mom or dad, we're going to have a miserable time here no matter what you do, because mom won't let up, dad won't let up until we're back with him or her.
Right. That puts them at a really hard spot.
Yeah, and then the other parent, the poor innocent parent, saying, "Look, I can see it.
Right.
What can I do about it? Seems like the only thing I could do is just send the kids back." And then you're just cutting your nose off to spite your face, saying, "Well, at least the kids aren't feeling guilty." But then I'm cutting myself out of their lives, and then they're going to feel like, "Well, it sounds like you don't want us here." I know this is a lot to lay on you, but you see it a lot, and it just is surprising to me how little anyone seems to know or want to do to address it.
Right. If you're asking what would that parent, what could they do to help their children in that situation,
Mm-hmm.
the first place to start there is to validate their experience. Say, look, I know what mom says, and you may feel this way. You have these feelings of feeling bad that you have to come here, and mom gets sad when you leave. You talk about the real experience that you have for them, and show them that you can be there for them through that experience. The thing that's probably going to be harder is what you were saying before, of the parent saying, I don't want to deal with this, so go back to mom or go back to dad. That's going to have that's going to be a lot harder on the child, to have a parent doing that versus one that's saying, this is very difficult, but we're going to work through this together. I'm going to help you through these feelings that you have towards your other parent.
As I hear you say this, it just occurs to me that this does not come naturally to me. Now, I am not divorced, but as I hear this, I think it makes sense when I hear you say it, but it's not what I thought of as I sat here and thought, if I were confronted with this problem or that problem, I would react differently. Some people are going to say, I would love it if I could talk to somebody like you, so that when I encounter these problems, can you give us an idea of, some people though are going to say, well, the court won't let me take the kids to counseling without the other parent's advice or consent. And then we know, of course, that other parent's not going to do it for two reasons. One, because the parent might either just be suspicious, right, or know darn well I will be exposed, right, for the manipulating and exploiting person I am. So then they make up some pretext about, you're just doing this to coach them. But what about parents just going to talk to you directly? What could you help them with?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of it that you're talking about is the parent's own emotion is in the mix. And so you always have to factor that in. If a parent was able to step back and be able to hold their own feelings that they have towards the other parent, a lot of them are probably pretty negative. If they were able to do that, but also consider their children's emotions, that's what they could learn in therapy. That's a big part of therapy. We call it holding someone's emotion, is a phrase we use a lot. It basically means I can feel what I need to feel, but I can also step in that other person's shoes. And we hear it all the time, being able to walk in another person's shoes, but it's doing it for our children. So at the very same time of me saying, I can't believe my spouse, my ex-spouse is doing this to my kids, saying, wow, look what this feels like for my child to go through this.
Or even the ex-spouse, maybe.
Right, and even having empathy for the spouse of feeling so sad or hurt that they're trying to manipulate the children in the process. So.
As I say, and if those that are watching or listening are like me, it makes sense when I hear it, right, when it's described, but it is not my natural reaction. And I would just point out that therapy often is seen by some people as treatment for somebody who's broken, treatment for somebody who's lacking in some area and needs fixing. That may be true, but you're saying therapy can also be used to help people make a transition. Good people that did nothing wrong can still benefit from therapy to help address problems in their ex and the children.
Right. Good therapy is in a lot of ways just giving you more options that you don't see in the moment. It's letting you step back and say, wow, there's another choice that I can make, and and it gives you that option to say that may be a better way to go in this situation.
Yeah, and then
So-
you hear the term coaching thrown around, you know, and it sometimes has a negative connotation, but that's really a big component of what you're talking about, is that, as you said, it's not saying you're coming to therapy because there's a fault in you that needs to be corrected. You're coming to therapy because you need to be better than you are. What it is that in some cases therapy is you're now being called upon to do things you never needed to do before.
Right.
As a parent in an intact family, you don't have to have the same responses to your kids and your circumstances as a divorced parent does.
Right. If you'd been married 10 years, you would have gotten good at doing certain things, but now being thrown into a divorce, you may need some help to learn some new skills that are going to help the kids through the transition.
And that's not a reflection as to you being deficient. Frankly, I think it's just the opposite. And I wasn't always the same as enthusiastic. I used to kind of think, hey, you know what? This happens to a lot of people. Take it in stride. You don't need to have somebody holding your hand all the time. But that's not really what we're talking about, are we?
No, we're not talking about. Yeah, therapy. A lot of people have the, maybe misconception that there's something horribly wrong with me. I need to go see this person that's gonna fix my horrible and whatever it is that they feel is wrong with them. They may feel that way when they go to the therapist, but probably the bigger reality is they just didn't learn the skills that they need at the moment because they haven't gone through that experience yet.
It's a new experience.
It's the first time for them. So it can help to talk to somebody that's talked other people through it, or maybe even been through it themselves. So that's why support groups and those things are helpful too. Reading books on the topic, anything like that, to get a grasp of what's it like to actually go through this experience that's new for the parents. So.
And the thought that occurs to me is, again, sometimes you have a problem that isn't in yourself, but in your ex. And so what you're really doing is saying, my ex is having an adverse effect on my kids. I'm really trying to help them so that they have a better time with me. I know I've done nothing wrong. This isn't for me so much as it's for my kids. I just happen to benefit from them feeling more comfortable around me, feeling happier in my presence, feeling like they can open up to me, and that I will keep confidences in appropriate circumstances, that I can be approached, that I'm not going to judge them.
Right.
Yeah.
It's that other parent just feeling more comfortable with the situation that oftentimes they feel like they've been thrown into, because they're probably saying, my spouse is so much different now that they are the ex. Their behavior is often quite different. So,
what percentage of people naturally have this ability to do these things and deal with divorce, taking it in stride, and a difficult ex-spouse?
I don't think a lot of people really take it in stride.
Yeah, me neither. I wish they could. I think a lot of people think they can.
I think it's quite the learning process that people go through. It's probably one of the hardest things they'll ever do in their life. So, they're gonna have their struggles. So.
And again, I think what the theme that I see emerging here is that a lot of times people may not know how ill-equipped they are. They may think, I've done nothing wrong, I'm going to lay it out plain to the kids, when that may not be the right way to do it at that time. Or they may think that they'll be indulgent when they ought to be angry when they ought to be more forgiving and flexible. It almost seems a lot of this is counterintuitive unless you're speaking to someone like yourself who can say, yeah, I know why you think this reaction makes sense. Let me see if I can show you why that may not be the case.
Right, you're trying to help them have some perspective of saying, we've seen what happens often when people act this way or their reaction to their spouse, and it's giving them that sense of perspective that's for them to stand back and say, do I really want to go down that road for my kids? Do I really want to take this direction? And often they just have to get the emotion out, which is a big part of the therapy. Once they've done that, then they can stand back and say, you know what, I think I really want to handle it this way. So that's a big piece that happens when they get help.
How long do people need to get this kind of help? Again, every person's unique, But generally speaking, when have you seen people start to turn a corner where they don't have to do it as often?
A big factor there is it depends on what their home life was growing up. If they had a pretty stable home life and then had their own divorce, generally in a few weeks, people can get some perspective and get rid of some of the negative emotion and kind of get their bearings again. Someone that's had a pretty rough home life, lots of divorce, things like that growing up, and then going through their own, kind of repeating the process, so to speak, they may need several months to really get through it, because it may really throw them into a tailspin. They might develop depression, anxiety symptoms. I've even seen PTSD from divorce. So when you start throwing in some of the mental health issues that people have, sometimes several months is needed to help that person get through it. So.
And it can be something people can do when they feel it's helpful, but my point being, it's not something that we're going to be locked into for years necessarily. It can happen, but...
Yeah, usually not. And keep in mind, a lot of the research says that a typical crisis, the actual feeling of crisis, resolves in about 6 weeks.
Oh, that's good to know.
That
I
doesn't,
was not aware of that.
That doesn't mean it's a one-time thing and you're done. But if the initial crisis was, dad leaving the house, it may be about 6 weeks of adjustment, and then maybe there's another crisis of the custody battle, and about 6 weeks of stabilizing of that. So that's a really good rule of thumb, because it's pretty clear in the research. Almost across the board, you see about a month to 6 week period is often what it takes for people to feel like, oh, okay, I'm kind of normal again. I'm through this crisis. So. And
would therapy help make the 6 weeks easier to bear, or does therapy shorten the 6 weeks to 5 weeks?
It doesn't necessarily shorten it. The crisis is probably going to play out as it would. But it's going to feel a bit lighter to have someone.
You can let this 6 weeks beat you to a bloody pulp, or you can say, I'm going to suffer here, but I'm also going to get through this with some degree of grace.
Right. Maybe get a boost to help me through this 6 weeks.
That's great.
Right.
A couple other questions before we finish up then. How expensive? A lot of people just think, the last thing I can afford to do is do some therapy. Now that I've got 2 households and I've got expenses that have doubled, or I've got to give money to one spouse, or things like, or I've got to cut back on my budget.
Right. Yeah, therapy is, if we're talking just a few weeks, it's a few $100s if you're paying out of pocket. If you have insurance, most insurance is going to cover something. Mm-hmm. A lot of people that are affiliated religiously can get help that way. It's pretty common to have help in that way to pay, for it during the crisis. So a good way to think about it, people will say, that's the last thing I can afford. It may be, if it's the case where you can't put food on the table, then therapy's probably going to have to wait. But if you're weighing out, do I wanted to take that vacation in 6 months, take the kids to Disneyland, but I'm really struggling right now. It may be a good investment to get a little help.
It may be a question of what's the better value. Yeah.
Right, to get some help.
Or the time and the money you invest up front may deprive you of some other things, but the dividends that pays in that 6 months, you may be going on a trip to Lagoon instead of Disneyland.
Right.
But you're going to have a great time as opposed to just tearing your hair out or worried or anxious.
Right. Yeah, it's just good to take a good, and this is often done with a good friend, to just say, how am I really doing with this situation? And if your friend has any experience at all with dealing with mental health issues, that's a bonus. Because they would be pretty good of saying, you know what, I've never seen you this depressed, or I've never seen you this anxious. I really think you should probably get some help. Because if you don't, just like any other thing, if it's a physical problem, if you don't go to the doctor, some of those things don't go away on their own.
That's interesting you should mention that. I got pneumonia last year. And I don't know how long I had it, but I thought I might actually be coming down with depression because I was just running out of steam, and I just kind of felt I was just running on, just half empty kind of a thing. And finally, but I wasn't coughing. You know what I mean? I didn't feel like I had a bad cold and anything else, and I did kind of have a little difficulty breathing. But I thought it was just because I was out of shape or something, and I finally went to, so that's interesting, because I think that's true. And finally, my wife told me, she goes, go see a doctor, I think you're sick. And I didn't think I was. I just thought I was having a rough patch and I was going to get through it. And I actually had pneumonia, treated me with the antibiotics and told me to take care of myself, and I got better. And interestingly enough, I learned another guy had the same problem, thought he was just feeling kind of under the gun, not under the weather, died.
Right.
Because he let the pneumonia get to a point where he reached the point of no return.
Yeah.
So I like what you say about just having a friend talk to you. Say, hey, as a friend, this just isn't like you.
Right. And it's just
or a therapist, for that matter.
Yeah, that would be, that could really help out. But it's just a thing in our society culturally to say, it's okay if you're physically ill to go to the doctor. Just still quite a bit more stigma with mental health issues to go get some help. So
yeah, but the question is, are you going to address the problem, or are you going to let your pride stand in the way?
Yeah, that's often.
And there's nothing like a good divorce to help humble you in many ways. I hope that you take that message away with you today. I appreciate the time that you spent. Before we go, for people that would like to talk to you again, perhaps, or learn some more, would you just give us the practices you're affiliated with and your contact information if they want to get a hold of you?
Yeah, the best way to do that is just go to wisepathcounseling.com, and you can contact me there. That's for my private practice out in Bluffdale, Utah. And I'm also at a clinic down in Salt Lake here, and that website is wecanhelpout.com, and you can find me there. And there's also a lot of other therapists and also psychiatrists if you need medication. Sometimes that's necessary if things get more severe. So
it's Jeff Carr.
It is.
LCSW.
Right.
Thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks.